So we're going to really, what we're going to talk about is just, for the most part, the networking side of Commander, different scenarios of how you can connect up Commander. And one of the big takeaways is you're still doing BACnet. So you still got to remember your BACnet rules, they still apply. But we'll show you different ways that Commander has been connected up, and away we go. So actually, yesterday we had quite a bit of the team in here. Brad's in here. He does a lot of the OS and scripts and radios and drivers and all sorts of things, and he gets our snap together. The snap is the operating system that's running on Commander is Ubuntu Core, otherwise, and the distribution system is called Snappy. And so instead of calling things applications, we call them snappications or whatever. They're just snaps. But it's I like how they really thought about security from the very get-go, and you really have to identify what parts of the OS you need and what parts of other snaps you want and how they connect and all that. And it's a pretty manual process. And then you have to get approval from Canonical, which does Ubuntu, and then put it on the store. And then the store is where the box goes out and gets it. So there's a big process to make sure we have the right stuff out in the cloud for the box to update itself. Okay, and you can't just throw something on there. You can't just put a USB stick in there and get something off. It'll just say, yeah. So that's a technical term. Okay, so this is what Bear was talking about. This is the Dell's Edge Gateway. This is the 3000 version. If you had the earlier version, it was a 5000, like a brick and all that. So this is about dimensionally maybe half the size on the two main dimensions as that one. Doesn't weigh as much. So the main thing here, just for the interfaces then, is we have two 10 base or 10100 base T Ethernets. It does not do gigabit Ethernet, just 10100. And then you have a Wi-Fi, 802.11 ABGNN, and the encryption for that, security is a WPA with pre-shared keys. So that's a wireless LAN, otherwise known as Wi-Fi. We're working on the EAP side, which is a little different encryption, and that for the keys. And then wireless WAN, that's another word for cellular and that. So right now you can put in AT&T and Verizon cards in there, and it'll do 3G and 4G LTE, and that's pretty simple as well. So there's somewhere in there, I forget where, I think it's on the other side. You can put in your SIM card, and it's up to you to register the SIM card, and away you go. This is what I call fresh out of the box, or FOOB, rather than noob or whatever. So this is the way the box is configured when you get it from us or from Dell, okay? So this port here, the port 1 for Ethernet, is set up to be dynamic. So that way you can hook it up in your office, and it'll get assigned an address right in the way you go out to the internet. Port 2 is set up as static. Now, Bear did not mention that, but you could, if you wanted to hook your laptop up to port 2 to configure, you can do that. But that is 192.168 1.2 subnet. No, 2.1. Did I say 1.2? Yeah. All right, dyslexia. Okay. And then the Wi-Fi is set up, again, fresh out of the box as an access point. And that was the 192.168 4.1 Bear was talking about. And then to hook up your laptop to that, that's the SSID will be Commander BX with a service tag after that. The service tag is Dell's word for serial number, and that's printed on one of the stickers there, although you gotta use a magnifying glass to read it sometimes. But so this is how it's pre-configured with all the different interfaces fresh out of the box. And when you are configuring it, as Bear was going through it at the beginning, your laptop has to have internet access. I think Brad had mentioned that a lot of the work that's actually done, the processing in a way, is done in your browser with the JavaScripts that we send, so you have to have internet access. But Commander, again, fresh out of the box, will let you get internet through its Wi-Fi. Does that make sense? So you do not have to have a separate way of getting internet for your laptop. Okay. We were talking about what we call the gear, which is really settings and that. So in the gear, the idea is this is where you can set up your interfaces, your networks, and the BACnet network. You're not discovering devices there, but you're setting up all the different networks for your BACnet communications, and you're doing that in here. And there's a couple project settings that you can set. So before I forget then, since it's not related to networking, and he should have mentioned it, on the gear, you can, towards the bottom, I don't show it, maybe some other slide might, you can set up the default priorities for writing BACnet points. There's two kinds. There's one for the schedules and the other one for the cards. And so you can set what those priorities are there. You know, you can do that with a cloud as well. But the thing that let's see, for the schedules, it defaults to priority 16. For the cards, it defaults to 8. If you have a card and you have the point, there's an advance button. Once you press on the button to change a point, a little advanced other button pops up, and you can click on there and change the priority from there. But it'll default to whatever default you set. So what I show here, this is Ethernet port 1, and this is port 2. Sometimes in we have two different names. Port 1 is how it's labeled on the front, and port 2 on the actual box. But in some of the software, we referred to them as either port 1, port 2, or also what we call ETH or ETH, which is short for Ethernet 0. So port 1 is ETH 0, which is the hardware reference in Linux, and then ETH 1 is port 2, but they're usually marked together. So you know the difference here is, I don't know if you can really see it, but over here you just simply, this switch there, that's enabled or disabled, and then this one here, the second one, that's whether it's going to use DHCP or static. Okay, this is further down we're still in the gear for the Wi-Fi. Let's see, this is how it looks like for the access point. So you see these text boxes here. This one is the IP address of Commander if it's an access point. And then this is the subnet mask that you are creating. So you are using Commander to create a Wi-Fi subnet. These boxes here are setting up your, Commander has a DHCP server in there that you're using if you have the Wi-Fi set up as an access point. And then this is the range that you are defining to assign to, you know, laptops or whatever that's going to connect up to Commander's network. But if you, this is an enable disable button. Over here, that's the button to make it either an access point or a client. So if you make it a client, what you're doing is you're trying to connect Commander up to the building Wi-Fi, and not as an access point, but as a client. And then in there, for both of them, you're going to put in the SSID and then the pre-shared key, the passphrase here. And then down here, if you have it set up as again as an access point, you can say, all right, I'm going to allow traffic to flow from my clients, my Wi-Fi clients, to the internet, and then you define which port the internet is on, whether it's port 1 or port 2. Does that make sense? And then that way, your clients can get access to the internet if you want it to. You can just flip that switch there, and they won't let them do that. And once you set that up on the gear page, then whenever you set up a BACnet network, then these are kinds of things that you see. And then we'll get into it here in a little bit, the different kinds of networking topologies that you'll come across or what you can handle. The main thing with BACnet is, besides, you don't really have to worry about the network number. We'll get into that in a minute, but are the BACnet devices that you're talking to, are they on the same subnet as you are, or are they on a different subnet? Now, and if it's if they're MSTP devices, obviously they're not on the subnet, but if their router, their BACnet router, is that on the same subnet as Commander, or is it on a different one? So that's the main criteria as to how you set it up. And the really difference is, if it's on the same subnet, you do not put in the router address here. It's really more of a, is this the BBMD, right? And then if the BACnet router is on a different subnet than Commander, then you'll put that router's address here, and Commander will presume, oh, that's my BBMD, and I'm going to foreign device in, and away we go. This is other part of, it's on the same form to configure your BACnet. This lets you identify if you want to have a range of device instances that you want to discover. You can set the range here. It just defaults to the complete range for device instances. You can also configure what network number if you want. If you have a BACnet router that has more than one network and you really only want to talk to one, you can tell Commander only talk to that one network rather than all of them that the router might supply. And then this down here identifies which actual interface on Commander you're going to talk BACnet, whether it's port 1 Ethernet, port 2, or even Wi-Fi. You can do the BACnet through Wi-Fi if the BACnet router is on some other subnet, right? And your only way of getting to that subnet is through the Wi-Fi. You can still tell it to do that. This is a little tricky. You're kind of specifying, let's see, instance options. You're specifying how the who is message is going to be formulated when it gets sent out. By default, we use a range. So it sends out, I'm doing a who is for a range of instance numbers from 0 to 4 million, or whatever you want to set it to. Or here, there's an any button, which means don't even give it a range, just make it all broad and that. And sometimes BACnet devices will respond to one and not the other. They're supposed to respond to both methods if they meet the criteria, but sometimes they don't always. So that's another reason to have that in there. If it doesn't work one way, if you're not discovering the devices that you think you should, then just flip the switch from range to any and try it again. So Commander, I was saying yesterday, Commander is almost a device. It's not a real device in that it does not really have any objects in that, but it behaves more like a device than anything else. But it's definitely not a BACnet router. So if you have multiple, you can define and configure several BACnet networks in Commander, and that's just simply the ones that it's going to communicate with. But it's not going to try to route traffic between them. So you cannot, do not think of it as a BACnet router to route BACnet traffic from one network to another through it. It's kind of going through the form that you get with the gear on the box. Up on the top would have been the Wi-Fi, then here's the 2 Ethernets. If they are enabled and you actually have communication going on there, they'll show up as green here. And if they are enabled but nothing's communicating for some reason, then they'll show up red. And if they're not enabled at all, they just will show up green, or gray there. So the whitelisting, we have 3 different methods for that. The idea with whitelisting is you are identifying which IP addresses you're going to allow the Commander to respond to or notice or listen to, and then also the ports, whether they're TCP ports or UDP ports. I don't show the ports here, but we have the range of the ports we already have configured in the whitelist. They're the ones that Commander normally uses, and we also have a range of typical UDP ports for BACnet already configured in there. But if you want to, if you want to configure your BACnet network to be something really on an oddball UDP port, you can change that here. 2 sets of rules. One is called the LAN set, and the other is the WAN. So when you configure an interface on Commander, you identify, is this going to be a LAN set of rules or a WAN? On the LAN side, these are the IP address ranges that Commander will listen to. So these are typical private network ranges. So you should not have to do anything. If the IT department has used the typical range, you ought to just be able to plug in Commander and away you go, okay? But if you try to talk to Commander through a VPN, sometimes the IT department will set up a VPN to be a different kind of subnet range than what is typical. And if that's the case, you just simply add that to the whitelist up there. You just type it in and save it and away you go. So that's one of the caveats. If you put in Commander and you're planning on using a VPN, you go out and then you try to talk to it, and through the VPN and it's not talking back, it might be that IT had set up the VPN to be something outside of this range. So if you're going to do a VPN, just talk to them first just to make sure what kind of range you have. WAN, we don't, if you set up an interface as a WAN, it's not going to listen to anything by default. You can add whatever range or a specific IP address that you want. And then the IP tables, that's just a special case that gets applied to all the interfaces regardless if they are LAN or WAN. One is the data cloud, that's this address, and the other is us at the plant at KMC, so that way if you're having troubles and you need us to remote in, as long as the firewall opens up the port so we can talk to Commander, and we'll be able to talk to it direct and away we go. So, but you can't, any of this by default that we already have, you can turn it off too. It's all up to you. Dual purpose means that this one port is being used for two different things. It's being used for access to the internet and access to your BACnet devices. Now we get a lot of job sites, this is what they're doing, right? And so there, you simply set up port 1 to either be dynamic or static, depending upon what IT says. And like Bear was saying in our installer guide, and also I think we have a pre-checklist guide, which is like a page. So whatever IT tells you if you're going to have dynamic or static, if you're on their network, then you set that up. But the idea, in order to get the internet, you have to have a gateway and a DNS configured for that if you're static, right? And then for the BACnet side, we're using ETH0, which is the same thing as port 1. And since this router is on the same subnet, we do not have to specify the router address because we're not behaving, or we're not going to use it as a BBMD. So you leave that router field in the BACnet network blank, and then you just have to make sure that you are using the same UDP port as the BACnet router is for your router BACnet traffic. This one is what I call a remote router. It's really a remote BACnet router, which means it's just on a different subnet. So there's the IP router there, but you're still same scenario where you are using the port 1 to get your internet access as well as talk to your BACnet devices. So the only difference there is in that field on the BACnet network is you would specify the IP address of that router because it's a BBMD. And then you have to make sure on that router that you configure it to allow foreign devices, just like regular BACnet. This is what I call mixed bag, which is, it's a mixture of MSTP devices. And you notice, I'll try this. This was also MSTP devices, but we don't really care per se. We just, as far as setting this up, we just want to know how do we get to the router, okay? So here, we've got the router to talk to our MSTP devices, but we also have BACnet IP devices, and they happen to be on the same subnet. So since they're on the same subnet, we could set up our one BACnet network and just say, use everything on your subnet and forget about it. So we don't have to do anything special for these. You might have 100 BACnet IP devices there. We don't care as long as they're on the same subnet in this scenario. And the routers are on the same subnet, so you don't have to do, and Commander will find it all. This one's a little different in that now we've got the BACnet router is on a separate subnet these guys here on the same subnet as Commander. So here is a case where you would set up two BACnet networks for Commander. One would be to talk to this router as a BBMD, and the other is to talk to all the local devices that happen to be on your same subnet. So in Commander, you can have multiple BACnet networks configured, and it all depends upon how you are trying to talk to those devices. So in this case, there would be two networks. Now this one is more typical, I think. Someone was asking yesterday what's the preferred network, and I always don't like answering that because it's really up to your IT and your building and all that. The preferred is the one that works. Bless you. The preferred is the one that works easily, right? But this one here, the idea is you're using one port for internet traffic and then another port to kind of separate out your BACnet traffic, and that's over here. And in this case, we've got two BACnet networks, so that's why both of them are on a different subnet than Commander. So that's why we have two BACnet networks set up in Commander. One is to talk to this guy, and the other one is to talk to that guy. And they're on two separate, since they're on two separate subnets, right? But everything else is still the same. You still have to make sure that this guy here, since he has the internet, he has both a gateway and a DNS set up. Normally on BACnet networks, you set up things statically, since BACnet doesn't like dynamic as a native way. There's ways around that. And the other thing, like we were talking about earlier, is you do not set up a gateway or a DNS over here. Well, you need to set up that's actually wrong. You need to set up a gateway because you got to know how to get to these guys. But you do not set up a DNS, because when you set up a DNS here, then Commander might try to go out to the internet that way. Yeah. So there's a DNS that's what it's going to try to use that's one of the rules, try to use that interface for internet. This is in a scenario where we're using Wi-Fi to get our internet. And so we've changed the Wi-Fi port here to be, instead of the access point, it's a client. And then you are using the SSID and the pre-shared key for the building's Wi-Fi network, right? And then over here, now we're connecting our BACnet devices to that. So in this case, a lot of times this is happening where Commander is being installed physically close to the BACnet, but it's not necessarily close to some sort of switch out there that you can hook up the Wi-Fi or the port, the Ethernet. But you do have Wi-Fi accessibility somehow. So for cellular, but instead of the Wi-Fi, you're putting your SIM card in, and that's where you're getting your internet. Depending upon the provider or your location, when you register your SIM card, it'll tell you what's called the APN. So there's a spot on the form on Commander to type that in. It's their way. It's kind of like an SSID in a way. So this is actually the diagram that's on page 4 or page 5. This is what you can give to IT that just illustrates. Here's Commander down here. Here's the firewall for your job site. And here are the different services that Commander is trying to talk to, and it shows the port numbers. There, that's network time. MQTT, that's it says Dell, but it's really canonical as well. That's where it goes out and tries to get the updates as it needs to. There's a couple databases here, or a couple servers for the database, and then there's another one here for the project server. That's the one, we didn't really go into that here, but the project server is the one that you go into and you can manage users there basically. And now if you need us to get into the box, and that's what this line here is for. A lot of times though you get, especially government, but schools and they'll have outbound rules. So the IT guys will need this picture to know what services you're talking to in case they need to make a policy for you for Commander. And then also what ports need to be open. And in that case, it might be easier just to put in cellular and use that as long as you get a good signal, of course. So the BACnet's still BACnet, so you still got to think about, you know, Commander is not a router. It's even not quite a device, but it's almost a device. But it can talk to more than one BACnet network at the same time. And your remote BACnet routers have to allow foreign devices so Commander can register with it. And then just make sure your UDP ports are all correct.